Imagine walking into a room, and the lampshades are made of human skin. This wasn't some creepy set for a horror movie. No. This was real life. It was the home of Ilse Koch, also known as the Red Witch of Buchenwald. How does an ordinary woman become a monster who collects the tattooed skin of murdered prisoners? Now, most people think the worst atrocities committed in Nazi Germany were done by men. But what if I told you some of the most brutal acts of violence and cruelty were carried out by women? From the 6'3" sadist who beat prisoners to death with her bare hands, to the twisted, sadistic nymphomaniac known as the hyena, who took pleasure in watching women suffer through surgeries without anesthesia. In today's story, we dive deep into the horrifying world of some of the most ruthless women who thrived in the Third Reich. Let's get into it. Hyena of Auschwitz. Let's start with Irma Gracie, infamously known as the Hyena of Auschwitz. At just 22 years old, she became the youngest woman to be executed under British law in the 20th century. But don't let her age fool you. Gracie was one of the most terrifying individuals to ever walk through the gates of the Nazi death camps. Gracie started her career at Auschwitz-Birkenau as a guard, and she quickly became one of the most feared figures in the camp. One female prisoner described her as the most depraved, cruel, imaginative pervert I ever came across. Gracie derived a sick kind of pleasure from watching others suffer. In fact, Gisela Perl, a Jewish doctor imprisoned at Auschwitz, recalled how Gracie would show up to watch medical procedures, without anesthesia of course, and would physically tremble in pleasure at the sound of the victim's screams. Yes, you heard that right. She would become so overwhelmed with excitement that she would salivate and shake, her body reacting in ways that made it clear this was more than just cruelty. This was perversion. Survivors tell how she was also heavily involved in the selection process for the gas chambers. Gracie would often handpick prisoners, especially young, beautiful women, out of jealousy, sending them to their deaths. Survivors recalled that Gracie personally killed at least 30 people a day during her time at Auschwitz. Yes, you heard that right. 30 people a day. This earned her the infamous nickname, the Hyena of Auschwitz. After Auschwitz, she was transferred to Bergen-Belsen, where her sadism only deepened. There, she forced prisoners to kneel for hours, straining their muscles, or made them hold heavy rocks over their heads until they physically couldn't stand anymore. If they failed to do exactly as she ordered, they would face severe beatings. In the freezing cold of winter, she made prisoners stand in the snow and rain for hours at a time, and she didn't bat an eye. By 1945, Gracie's reign of terror came to an end when she was captured by British forces and put on trial. Even then, she maintained her innocence. But witness after witness lined up to testify against her. Sentenced to death by hanging, Irma Gracie became the youngest woman to be executed under British law in the 20th century. And how did she face her death? With the same cold indifference that marked her life. Her last word, schnell, meaning quick in German. Even in her final moments, she wanted control. Red Witch of Buchenwald. Our next subject takes us to Buchenwald, where in 1945, as the horrors of the Holocaust were being uncovered, one story in particular shocked the world. It was about a woman, not a soldier, not a doctor, but the wife of a high-ranking Nazi official. Her name was Ilse Koch, but she became known as the Red Witch of Buchenwald. What she did was so grotesque, so sickening, that to this day, it's hard to believe. It's April 1945, 9 days after American soldiers liberated the Buchenwald concentration camp. United Press correspondent Anne Stringer is walking through the camp, documenting the horrors left behind by the Nazis. She enters a room filled with objects that appear ordinary at first glance, lamps, books, even bookmarks. But as she gets closer, her stomach drops. She realizes what she's looking at isn't ordinary at all. One lampshade in particular stands out, 2 feet in diameter, about 18 inches tall, made from 5 panels of skin. Human skin. As Stringer writes, I could see the pores and the tiny, unquestionably human skin lines. Next to it, more objects, book bindings, bookmarkers, all made from the skin of concentration camp prisoners. These gruesome ornaments belonged to Ilse Koch. Koch was the wife of Karl Koch, the commandant of Buchenwald, and she took full advantage of her position of power. But unlike others who quietly enabled the Nazi regime, Ilse Koch had a fascination with cruelty. According to witness testimony, she would have prisoners with tattoos line up shirtless. Koch would pick out a design she liked, a rose, a ship, or a snake. That prisoner? They were marked for death. Their skin would be removed, tanned, and turned into an ornament for Koch's collection. Survivors at Buchenwald remember Koch riding through the camp on horseback, often searching for her next victim. One survivor, Kurt Frobos, recalled a man named Jean, a French or Belgian prisoner. Jean had a tattoo of a four-masted ship on his chest, an intricate piece of art that caught Koch's eye. She wrote down his number, and by that evening, Jean was gone. His body, his skin, had become another addition to Koch's macabre collection. When Buchenwald was liberated, Koch was arrested and put on trial for her war crimes. She was defiant, denying all accusations. In court, she claimed she had never owned a lampshade made of human skin, saying the first time she even heard of such a thing was in a magazine article. The evidence, however, told a different story. Despite her denials, testimonies against her were overwhelming. But here's where it gets unsettling. Despite the chilling testimonies, no physical evidence of the infamous human skin lampshades was ever presented in court. None. It's possible that after the war, those gruesome items were either destroyed or hidden, and because of that, Ilse Koch was never formally convicted of that specific crime. However, her involvement in the deaths of countless prisoners and her sadistic treatment of them still led to a life sentence. But it appears that the guilt of her crimes eventually broke her. While she was imprisoned at Aisha Women's Prison, Koch began experiencing severe delusions. She believed that survivors of the concentration camps were coming into her cell to torment her, living in a constant state of paranoia. In a suicide note written to her estranged son, Uwe, Koch said, "There is no other way. Death for me is a release." The Sadist of Stutthof. At 6 feet 3 inches, Herta Bothe, the so-called ruthless overseer of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, towered over most of the people around her. But when she was arrested by Allied troops on April 15, 1945, after the liberation of the camp, it wasn't just her height that stood out. Despite her imposing stature, Bothe didn't look like the typical Nazi guard. While others wore night black jackboots and SS uniforms, she wore ordinary civilian clothes, a fact that might have led some to underestimate her. But that normal appearance concealed something far more sinister. During the Belsen trials, survivors came forward to describe the sickening acts of cruelty she had committed. One survivor testified that they watched Bothe beat an 18-year-old girl to death. Her crime? Daring to eat scraps of food from the kitchen. Another prisoner told prosecutors that Bothe had casually shot 2 people, for no reason at all. And here's the disturbing part. Despite these accounts of brutality, she was only sentenced to 10 years in prison for using firearms against prisoners. That's right. For all the suffering she caused, she got a decade behind bars. But it gets even worse. She didn't even serve the full 10 years. Bothe was released early and somehow managed to live out the rest of her days in relative peace, under the same name, blending back into society. For nearly half a century, she lived quietly, all the while unrepentant of her role in the horrors of the Holocaust. In a rare interview in 1999, just before her death at age 79, Bothe was asked if she felt any remorse for her actions. Her response? Chilling. She said, "Did I make a mistake? No. The mistake was that it was a concentration camp, but I had to go to it. Otherwise, I would have been put into it myself. That was my mistake." Bothe, the ruthless overseer of Bergen-Belsen, never faced justice in the way her victims deserved. Instead, she lived her life convinced she had done nothing wrong, just another unsettling reminder of the depth of cruelty that some people are capable of, and how sometimes justice is never fully served. So, that's the story of some of the most terrifying women in Nazi history. These women remind us that sometimes the evil hides behind a friendly face or an ordinary life. On this channel, We dive deep into the darkest and most terrifying stories like these because it's important to remember that the monsters of history were very real. If you found today's story disturbing or fascinating, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to stay tuned for more stories that will chill you to your core. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.